Hello again and welcome to episode 100 of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, March 10th, 2016. I'm Ariel Helwani back inside our New York City studio. It is a huge day for us, episode 100. What a milestone. In case you missed it, that's 100, the centennial episode of the Mixed Martial Arts Beat. I'm trying to break this down as many ways as
99
possible.
plus 1.
Yes. This started out as a dream way back when. It was myself, Luke Thomas, and Mike Chiappetta in our old studio, and it has evolved into this. Wow. We've come a long way.
We've gone real far, Ariel.
Yes,
We've made such leaps and bounds.
And how about the man in the shirt upping his game today, rocking the bow tie? A very nice touch.
It's a festive event. Come on.
Yeah, this is big. And what a great week to have the 100th episode of the show, following one of the biggest events in UFC history. We'll get to that in a minute, but first, let me do the usual shtick here. That, of course, is Luke Thomas of MMAfighting.com and SiriusXM. That is the aforementioned man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com and the Washington Post. And, of course, that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall.
Should have worn my top hat.
Yes, where is it?
Smart move.
Also at MMAfighting.com as well. All right, guys, first things first. Mazel tov. This is a big deal for all of us. Perhaps for 200, we'll have some balloons, something, a cake. But this is just 100. Let's not get crazy here. Not that big of a deal.
It took 300 to get your big homage.
That's right. Exactly.
We got a few hundred more to go, I guess.
Absolutely. Okay. A few days removed from UFC 196, a breathtaking night for the UFC. In particular, of course, the top two fights. Miesha Tate becoming the women's bantamweight champion, defeating Holly Holm with just 90 seconds left in the fight. They were, what are you doing with the cup over there?
Putting it over there so in case
okay, you're freaking me out. He was moving the cup. I thought he was trying to knock it over. All right, good start. So Miesha Tate wins, and of course, Conor McGregor loses to Nate Diaz. And then the world explodes. I mean, mainstream media is talking about it. This was a really big deal. Trending above 1 million pay-per-view buys, the third largest gate in UFC history. All in all, a home run for the UFC. But a narrative has developed over the last 48 hours or so. Dana White, in talking to the media, I believe he was talking to ESPN in particular, but he said this in a couple of places, focusing on the Miesha Tate win over Holly Holm, essentially, in essence, said that Holly Holm and her team rolled the dice and lost by not waiting for the Ronda Rousey rematch. They took a gamble, and in doing so, they lost out on a lot of money. And this has become, in my opinion, the big talking point now, 4 or 5 days removed from the fight. We'll get to everything, but I want to focus on this narrative first. What do you make of what Dana White has been saying as of late?
So uncharacteristic of him to squabble publicly with a manager looking out for their own client's best interest. I, for one, am shocked. This is par for the course, This is a guy who doesn't like to deal with managers, and there's less management influence generally than there used to be for any reason. The Reebok deal and sponsorships generally, and so I think it's much more to do with that. You mentioned Mike Chiappetta had written a column, and many of us had observed that it is very hard to understand how one can praise McGregor for taking risk and then failing, and then blame Holm for taking risk and then failing, absent the context that he has an axe to grind with Lenny Fresquez, right? That's really what this all centers on, which is fine. They can squabble or not. I thought Coachman kind of cheering on Dana was a little bit weird in that regard. I was like, whatever, that's a separate issue. But I don't think this is too difficult to understand. This is strictly their beef. And look, when Holly Holm came into the UFC, she wanted between 30 and 40, and had said she'd been offered as much as $250K to fight. They settled on 25 and 25. So in the end, it looks like no matter what they say publicly, they find some reasonable middle ground to make it all work. But yeah, this is just a thumb in the eye of like, I told you so. But it's like, I don't know how you tell someone I told you so if you're party to it. Even a reluctant party, like you put on the fight, you have a responsibility in this as well. It's just more of the same, really.
Yeah, if you are running fights, run fights. Why would you criticize somebody for taking a fight? It would seem like if the opposite would be the truth. What if Holly had said, "Well, I'm not going to fight again. I'm going to wait till Ronda Rousey comes along and I can get a big payday." Then your 135-pound women's belt is sitting there idle, collecting dust for month after month after month until Rousey comes along. Sure, that's a big payday. But if you're running a sport, you actually have to run the sport. It's not just about going to the bank and cashing your checks. I mean, your Broncos were in the Super Bowl. Let's say the NFL, after the day after the Broncos beat the Patriots to get to the Super Bowl, they said, that Cam Newton's had a pretty good season, but this Brady versus Manning stuff is magic. We need to see the rematch of that in the Super Bowl. So we're gonna push this Cam Newton guy aside, and we're gonna put that up there. People would go nuts. The entire sports world would go berserk if you.
The fight game is structured much differently.
It's structured differently, but it's
Stretch
still
of an analogy there, but I get what you're trying to say.
Of course, it's structured differently, but at the bottom of it all, there's a championship at stake. This is not just some fight. This is a fight for a championship. You need to maintain some integrity with that. And if Ronda Rousey gets beaten in a fight and is not willing to come right back and fight again right away, your champion has to defend the belt against somebody.
Okay, Chuck, what about the point though? Now that she lost, did she screw up? Was it a mistake?
No, not really, because obviously those are the stakes every time you get in there, right? And I thought that the fact that she did not want to wait that full year, she made that very clear immediately. She wasn't going to wait out a big timetable. As we were talking about Ronda at UFC 200 originally, we sort of knew that wasn't going to happen pretty close thereafter. To me, it was like she was going to have to fight. She wanted to. She's in her mid-30s. She wants to compete while she can. She wants to cash in on these moments while she can. No. And the bottom line is from the UFC, it's funny because you're right. People don't realize there's this thing going on between Dana and the manager, other than what they're told in that situation, unless you really pay attention to the sport. But it's kind of crazy because these things come out and it's just basically a double standard. It's just how it's like a juxtaposition of that right away because he's praising all week in the lead up, all the promos to Conor McGregor. That was the whole thing. Anywhere, any place, anytime, anyone, whatever. This is the whole thing. This was the admiration that was placed on this bout. And so to go coming out of it, just because it didn't go the way that Holm, I guess, had hoped it might. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And to go the other direction, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But again, like you mentioned. This is Dana White always, one says don't go on the internet, let's go watch Fight Pass and say, you know what I mean? That sort of thing is always one thing and to the next. But I can't blame Holm for doing this because if she wins, it only makes the fight bigger, wouldn't it? Like a rematch or the rematch with Rousey bigger. And from the UFC's perspective, I was like, you do have that trilogy fight. You still have all these same things in place. So I don't really understand. Besides just that. Inside squabble going on with the manager. I don't really see why there's a huge problem on that side either.
And even with the result that we actually saw, what did we get out of it? Well, the UFC gets a viable women's 135-pound division. What was the biggest complaint that everybody had for Ronda Rousey? We talked about this a lot on this show, where Rousey was just mauling people, one after another, and the whole complaint about her is, does she belong on a pound-for-pound list, or does she not? It was all about, well, she's up here, and everybody else is a bunch of nubs, right? That was your favorite word.
Nubbers is also a
that's an acceptable one. So that was the perception, a wide perception for the women's division. Then Rousey loses to Holm, and so suddenly there were two women up there, but basically everybody else was a nobody. Well, now Miesha Tate, who was twice lost to Rousey, comes up, she grabs the belt. So now there are at least three, plus Kat Zingano has a win over Tate. So now you got four women right immediately who you could say are all legitimate top flight bantamweight. Then you get Amanda Nunes. Now you got five. Now they've grown.
Juliana Pena.
They've grown an actual division. Instead of it being a one-woman show, they've grown an actual division. How could Dana White have a complaint about that?
Yeah. So here's a quote from Dana White in 2013 on my. Oh Christ, on my wonderful Samsung Galaxy Note 4, which I want to burn.
Them checks, baby.
Yeah, I know. Which I want to throw out the window. This thing sucks. All right, this is from 2013. Now this is Dana White talking about why he doesn't want to pay her a bunch of money, Holly Holm, and he also is squabbling with the manager. Could be from your interview. I need to double check. Quote: "There's all kinds of hype around people. You find out what's real and what's not real when somebody steps into the UFC." And I think that is the most interesting and compelling quote I could find about this, because the truth of the matter is, for Dana White to even argue this is nonsensical. It would be him saying everything the UFC has done heretofore has been a mistake. Because what is the difference with what Holly Holm did and the difference what Conor McGregor did, and why does it make sense? The truth of the UFC is this. They build stars, they build myths, they build legends. But unlike the boxing world, there is a built-in mechanism into the UFC that is about popping balloons. that is about checking myths, that is bringing people back to size as a signal of authenticity. You can't come in here and pretend you're somebody you're not. You've got to fight the people that matter. You've got to get in line, you've got to fight through the queue, and if you're at the top of the queue, then you have to fight the queue itself. That's what ultimately this is about. And yes, we've skirted the lines 1,000 times. The punks, and was Conor McGregor promoted in a way that was a little bit friendly early on? Sure. But at some point, this is what you want out of the How can the promoter who has built a deserved reputation for not letting BS slide then say this, other than to take a dig at a manager? It would be saying what makes us special in the combat sports space all of a sudden no longer has value just because of this. What Holm did and what Conor McGregor did deserves to be applauded by Dana White, by us, by everyone else out there. And frankly, you should commend the UFC for putting on those fights because they don't build up legends that don't deserve to be legends. Either you win the fights or you don't, and that's the bottom line.
I really just don't think that, even from a business sense, we all know that Holm, and Rousey rematch will be huge, and especially would have been huge if she hadn't lost. But I still don't think they've lost that. That narrative is still there. Ronda Rousey was beat, right? Like, this is by Holly Holm. It still exists. That so much comes of that rematch whenever it happens. So in some ways, I'm like, because I feel like that fight remains as huge as it's going to be, especially just kind of, especially if it comes up soon, if it happens sooner rather than later. But to me, they have lost nothing, and that was what was so sort of puzzling about. I was like, wow, you make it sound as if you just lost out on a huge.
No, they did lose something.
Well, I mean, there's always some of that goes away, but the same way with McGregor, right? It would be the same thing. Like, he's no longer undefeated in the UFC. He hadn't lost in all these. I mean, there's a lot of things always in play that way, but I still think that. Don't you believe that it will still be a huge seller?
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure. The point is this. If your strategy is, as they were before 189, and we talked about it and we praised them for it on this podcast, if your strategy is to bet on yourself, it's still a bet. You're not always going to win. And so in that sense, did they lose that 2 million pay-per-view buy potential if they had waited a year to do Rousey Holm? I guess they lost that. But to your point, it's still big no matter what. And the other point is, you still kept in there that measure of authenticity. If Holm wasn't the person to hold the belt, then she's not the person to hold the belt. It's whoever deserves to hold it with real matchmaking.
Exactly.
Again, we can play with those lines, but it's just bizarre for Dana White to be mad at a manager. They didn't force this fight on Holly. She asked for it.
And to your point, the UFC, and in particular Dana White, who is still, in my opinion, one of, if the not most powerful man in the sport,
Sure.
he can tell the world what to think. So if he would have come out and said, look at the balls on Holly Holm. She could have sat out. She could have waited. She went in there and took on the toughest competitor out there. Was 90 seconds away from defending that title.
Right.
And she's a big star, and people care about her. You know what? My heart goes out to her, but I got a lot. That's a real fighter. That's a fighter's fighter. That's not what happened.
That was a rousing speech just now, Ariel.
Well, you know what I'm saying?
That's true.
And it almost feels like they never got behind Holly Holm ever since the win over Ronda. It always kind of felt like they never pushed her the way they should. And I always think about the Rashad Evans Shogun Rua fight that was supposed to happen at UFC 128. And I remember when Rashad got injured. And I remember Dana, he said this many times before, but he said, I think this was kind of like the first time he talked about it. There's a small window that you have in this fight game. And Rashad waited for that title shot, and look what happened. He never got it again. He injured his knee, and for all intents and purposes, never been the same. Yeah, he got it against Jon Jones, but he never got back to that point to where he was maybe one of the best in the world. And so Holly Holm is in her mid-30s. She had a full boxing career. You wanted Holly Holm to wait a year, maybe? I mean, Ronda Rousey wasn't coming out and telling the world, I'll be back October 31st.
Right.
She was like, yeah, I'm coming. Yeah. You wanted her to wait a year in her mid-30s. She's never been hotter in her life. Her star would have fizzled.
Yeah.
Next November if she fought again. That's what you wanted her to do. Instead, she fought in March, 4 months later, and this pay-per-view got over 1 million buys and made a crap load of money. How is this a bad thing? And would have made more if she would have won. How is it a bad thing? Which I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it.
Not to mention, she basically jumped in. Everybody was talking about when they made Rousey Holm for 193. What? She's too green still. They're just throwing her to the wolves.
Right.
Well, this has been her mentality, is just to get in there and keep going. She's never changed. So for them to even be like, there shouldn't even be a surprise that she'd want to keep it going. The same as Miesha Tate when she was on your show. She basically said, they were sort of gunning for UFC 200. They'd rather keep it rolling rather than wait out Rousey's timetable. So, to me, there was no big surprise in Holly Holm.
I remember when I was talking to her manager like a month, 3 weeks after the win over Ronda Rousey, and I remember where I was, and I was like, okay, so what do you guys want to do? It's like, we want to fight Miesha Tate as soon as possible. February, March. I was like, are you guys crazy? You don't want to wait for the rematch? Hell no, we're not waiting for the rematch. We want to fight. Holly Holm is not motivated by money, he said. She's motivated by competition. She's made money in her career. She was a boxing star. She wants to fight. She wants to prove she's the best. How do you not love that?
But there's
as
also
a promoter and a fan.
There's also money there. I mean, yes, they put their eggs in the. They want to put their eggs in the one basket of that 2 million pay-per-view sales that supposedly is out there to see Rousey versus Holm too. But so you lose maybe the 2 million that's gonna be there, but that's still a sellable fight. Who would have ever thought that a Miesha Tate versus Ronda Rousey fight would have appeal? I mean, after seeing Miesha lose to her twice, nobody would have thought that a third one was really gonna be a fight that people would be interested in. But now, when Miesha gets to walk in there with the belt, that's a fight that has appeal. Miesha Tate also just defeated Holly Holm in a fight that she was losing all the way along. People want to see that. I'd love to see that again. Can Holly Holm complete the 5 rounds and win that fight like she was on the way to doing the last time? So there's so many more things, and rather than just putting all your eggs in that one basket and hoping for those 2 million in pay-per-views, you add up what you're going to get with all those other fights, and it's going to probably surpass it.
And then plus, as I mentioned before, you still hold on to that air of authenticity, that you're not making bull-ass fights to produce a phony identity. Either you are that guy, either you are that St-Pierre in his prime, that Silva in his prime, or you are not. And if you're not, next man up. Let's figure out who is. But I wanted to say something. Well, it was super instructive for my personal view of the world. I went and covered Mayweather-Pacquiao. I was there. Let me assure you, there is no there. The phoniest event I've ever seen in the world. There was nothing to it. I mean, people were trying to do the best they could. You know, it was just a celebration of commerce. Really, it was an attempt to say, how much can we consume at once? How much can we produce at once? It had nothing to do with any sort of viability. If the UFC has to get a $2 million pay-per-view event or 2 million pay-per-view buy event to go down to a 1 million, but then retain the credibility, that to me is worth way more. Not merely as a consumer, but as someone invested in MMA hanging around, that they keep this. Anytime a promoter's like, we should really adjust all the things on the schedule to maximize the dollars possible, even though it could cause innumerable amounts of conflicts and holdups in divisions, that's when you know it's too much. If you can make it without too much struggle, then make it without too much struggle. But this idea of like putting her on the shelf for a year to chase money, it's exactly why Mayweather-Pacquiao was ultimately a big commercial success and nothing else.
I think what you just brought up, Luke, is kind of plays into the narrative that we've also been hearing from a lot of mainstream media about how this is the death of the UFC or this is the death of the UFC.
So stupid.
We'll get to that deeper.
It's stupid, but it's also, in a way it is, but in a way it's not because of what you're just talking about. Mayweather, Pacquiao was all about, one guy as unbeatable, and everybody out there who wasn't even a boxing fan wanted to see it. So of course it became a huge thing. And as we know, the UFC and MMA in general is not about propping up some guy to be 49-0 and be unbeatable, whether he is or really isn't. It's about competition, just like you said. And so we're talking to two different audiences. We're talking to an audience of people who want to see fights, as opposed to an audience that just wants to see whoever the big, the flavor of the week is. And that's really what it is.
This will sound completely hyperbolic and a little bit insane, but in a weird way, those top 2 fights on Saturday, going into them and going out of them, really exemplify why MMA is a sport that we adore so much, right? I mean, here you have a woman, Holly Holm, who could have waited for the big rematch, a fight that most people would have predicted she would have won, and decided not to wait and fought a very tough person and was 90 seconds away from winning and did tap, tried to tap, whatever. Miesha Tate, Hail Mary, wins. Finally, she gets over the hump. That's beautiful. And then you have Conor McGregor, whose opponent, pulls out 11 days out. He's about to make history, and he fights a guy who, bigger, not bigger, tough matchup for him, and he loses the first round, and then he wins. I mean, everything about it. No one looked bad. No one looked bad going in. You're going in, you're like, man, these guys got some balls. And then going out, you're like, all of them handled it well, professionally, with class. There were tremendous fights. You could have argued which one was fight of the night. I mean, there was nothing bad about Saturday, and that's why I kept going back. When you talk about the mainstream media, and we can get into that, I kept going back to them saying, like, this was a bad night for the UFC, bad night for the UFC. Third highest gate, over 1 million pay-per-views. All 4 competitors look fantastic in victory and defeat. How is this bad? How is this bad for the UFC? Why are they even thinking this way? Because they think that this is pro wrestling?
No.
And a certain, what is it?
Because if you listen to what the people in the mainstream media say in a variety of sources, and some of the stuff out there is like comical in how bad it is. But a lot of it is like, to your point, okay, maybe there was a big gain or something that night, but it's a disaster going forward, like wanking motion. I wish I could make it. They're aping back decades of boxing promoter logic back to you. That's what that is. It's who are in the mainstream is writing that stuff. A lot of it are older reporters who have been around the fight game only as a function, no, I'm kidding, only as a function of just seeing what they saw in boxing. And they repeat back, you should have saved that guy. This is, and I mentioned this yesterday, this is the same kind of logic people used after Mayweather Pacquiao and many other bouts, of course. Being like, you know what, there was nothing, this was not real. This was a staged event about nothing. They knew they could make a bunch of bucks if they put this together, but there was no merit to what we were watching here in some kind of capacity. And yet now, when they get a promoter doing the opposite, they're like, you know what? You should have protected your record. Make up your mind about what you want. I know what I want. I want yes, a promoter's always going to make the fights that people want to pay money to see. That's always going to be the impulse. That's always going to be the modus operandi. Okay, fine. But I cannot believe we live in a world where the audience, in this case, the mainstream media, is saying, I need you to lie to me more because I want to believe in something that's not really there. What? I want to believe in something that's there. Yeah, you got to dress it up a little bit. Have you ever had a girlfriend in your life or a boyfriend or whatever? When they get out of bed, they don't look so great. Have them shower, put some lipstick on them. It's the same thing. It just looks a little bit better. I guess my only point is this is what happens when newsrooms are like, that talented person in MMA who's been grinding away, we're going to ignore them. We're going to bring in this joker who's been doing golf coverage, who's 75 and whose back hurts, and they're going to go and cover mixed martial arts. It's a failure of editorial leadership, and it's a failure of imagination.
Why do we care so much?
Because they're driving the narrative. We're responding to it.
See, but I think I would frame it a little differently, and you brought some things in that I would carry in there. I think of it more like
the phone's out again.
I got to turn it off.
Oh, okay. I thought you got another quote.
Are you going to record me?
I'm just going to start texting.
Yeah.
No, I thought the way I look at it is the mainstream sports world, the UFC, MMA in general, is very much on the fringe of that. I mean, people who watch this show, people who go spend their days at MMA Fighting or Junkie or Sherdog, or listen to the Luke Thomas show on Sirius XM,
Smart people.
or UFC Tonight on Fox Sports 1 or whatever you do. I'm not sure what you do.
Yeah.
Sit around.
But those folks, they don't need to be convinced. But then there's this whole other world of people, and people, Dana White and the folks at the UFC want to try to reach those folks. And those folks are a little bit outside the reach of the MMA world. There are people out there who love sports who are just never going to be big fans of MMA. However, every once in a while when Ronda Rousey is beating people in 16 seconds, and then Conor McGregor comes along and spouts poetry and movement, and then goes out there and looks invincible, some of those people come venturing in. And the reality is when McGregor lost the other night, some of those people will lose interest. So from that perspective, people saying this is a death knell of the UFC, it's accurate in the sense that for a while, people aren't going to pay attention. People out in the bigger mainstream, they're not going to pay attention. Even if McGregor comes out and wins his next fight and holds on to the featherweight belt, it's not going to be important enough to those people out in that world. But that's not the audience you're really serving. I mean, after Mayweather against Pacquiao, all I heard was people saying, I can't believe I spent $100 on that crap. I'll guarantee you, people who bought UFC 196 the other night, at the end of the night, they were like, that was worth every cent. That was a great night of fights, and I'll do it again the next time. And that's who you really want to serve. That's who the UFC needs to be serving, the people who are maybe going to buy your next pay-per-view. Those are the people you got to look for.
It's such a young sport, at this point. They've sort of built themselves up, obviously, with the Fox deal, UFC kind of breaking through new walls, and everybody has sort of followed them trying to break into the mainstream, right? So these two things come together, you're going to have this overlapping sort of, people knowledgeable who know what's going on versus people who just kind of jump in when it's hot, when it's hot and see what's going on. They're going to come out of it with some narrative that is probably exaggerated or wrong, and that's what I saw on this thing. I mean, I felt like the more scrutiny, or the more people are watching it, that's how the mainstream sort of works, right? Like they want to be involved in this, and that's kind of what I kept seeing is that narrative of how ruined. I saw some of the things. I know there's one particular article that you sent out where it's about Conor McGregor was never great. You're going to get that sort of thing because I think that, it's crazy. We've been talking about this a little bit. The sport is finally coming to the point where there's so much parity. There's so many, with the testing and everything else that's going to happen, where there's going to be parity. I don't know how many people are actually going to remain, undefeated for years and years in the sport. Part of what's happening and is being accepted, at least within the bubble, and I think extending outwards, is people lose, and you understand that that's what it is. And especially ones like Conor McGregor, he loses a fight where there's all these extenuating circumstances fighting up to it. We put that asterisk on there, and I don't want if you'd call it that, but you put something on it that says, okay, but that was out of the ordinary. You go back to whatever it is. I mean, that's sort of the nuanced version of how you watch the sport now, because that's what's going on. Like you said, I thought Conor McGregor looked great in that first round. He just was trying to headhunt so much. He was trying to load him up so much, trying to knock him out. But you still saw his movement. Did you not still look at Conor McGregor in the first round and think wow, he really is a special guy? So to me, I'm everybody sort of wins, but the mainstream, when it comes down to black and white, did they win? Did they lose? It's ruined. I mean, those types of narratives just don't fit anymore for the sport.
Isn't it interesting that anytime the UFC hits the mainstream news cycle, the boxing topic always comes up? This is what boxing does. This is what they don't do. Blah blah blah. And isn't it interesting that anytime boxing is brought up in the mainstream news cycle, they always say the reason I don't watch boxing anymore is because the best don't fight the best. We don't get the fights that we want. And here they are almost being hypocritical in a sense.
Almost.
Well, they are, and they're saying they're blaming the UFC for the same thing that they're telling us that boxing doesn't do.
Right.
You know what I mean? On Saturday night, the best possible opponent for Holly Holm to fight now was Miesha Tate, and she fought her. And she lost. Yeah. Big deal. And for Conor McGregor, if that was boxing, if Conor McGregor was Andre Ward, he was about to fight some guy, and that guy pulled out 11 days out, Andre Ward's not fighting that fight, right?
Right.
Conor McGregor said, give me the next guy. Right. And what's the fight that the world wants to see? It was Nate Diaz, maybe even more so than RDA when that was announced.
It's like you said, and I thought it was interesting. You said it's like a heat check in basketball. Guys just seeing how hot they are. Well, you're going to shoot from half court and just see if it goes in. That's sort of what it felt like.
After that rant in December in Orlando, everyone was buzzing about Nate Diaz. It made no sense ranking-wise. It made no sense as far as divisions or whatnot. But people were just like, that's a fun freaking fight, and the build-up will be even more fun.
But it made some sense. I mean, he was number 6 in lightweight.
To a degree. But, he's the featherweight champion. He should be fighting Frankie Edgar or Aldo again. That kind of
I understand.
Thing.
I mean, once they had ventured out of the 145 territory.
If you would have said after UFC 194 that night that Conor McGregor's next fight was a welterweight fight against Nate Diaz, this is before the Michael Johnson fight, it would have sounded crazy.
Right, but the RDA fight was not crazy. At least in theory, it was
exactly.
not crazy.
But then he says, okay, I'm not getting that fight. Keep me on the card. Let's make some money. Let's have some fun. I don't understand. But here's a challenge that I'd like to issue to you, to every journalist out there who covers this sport so well. Stop giving attention to those stupid articles because it's just troll nonsense.
It is. I have to get it out of my system.
I know, but they want you to do that.
Yeah,
they know that we are watching, and they love it when we tweet that stuff. Look at those small-time MMA journalists giving our stuff, a few extra clicks. Why?
We're being their interns. Is what we're doing.
Of course, we're pushing. They don't push our crap out. Why should we push their crap out?
Because we think we are so accustomed to battling false narratives about MMA in the larger space.
Ignore them.
That we.
This sport is mainstream.
It is now. It is now. But there's a lot of us, me included, there's a lot of us who have, we grew up in the area when it was, Elite XC was failing and IFL was failing and what's going to happen. And
we were defensive from the get-go.
We've been defensive as a journalism group and as a fan base for years. We're going to have to get it out of our system a little bit. But to your point, you're right.
Let's get it out.
They are just surfing on nonsense and knowing that it doesn't really matter because the normal readers are never going to hold them accountable for it.
It's uneducated. There's no facts behind it. They don't know what they're talking about. To me, I feel like we give it credibility by even addressing it. Why you're at the end of the day, USA Today that published that nonsense article is getting the clicks, right? Clickbait, as everyone likes to accuse us of being. That is bullshit clickbait. And why are we giving them those extra clicks?
If when people are dismissive, for so long dismissive, and then they're still dismissive. I don't know. There's something about it.
It's also lowest common denominator. If SI, my editor said, hey, we really want you to write about the cricket match over. I want to send you to India to write about the cricket match. I know nothing about that sport. What would I write? I would write about whatever the most sensational aspect of. Some guy is the best. I'm gonna nobody's ever gotten him out. Whatever. That's what I'm going to write about, because you don't
have
understand.
more respect for you as a journalist. I don't think that you would come out with a crazy statement that Joe Blow from India is not as good as we all thought he was if you didn't know what you were talking about.
Exactly.
You know what I
But
mean?
that's
Think about that for a second.
But if I
a
wanted
person
to have,
who knows nothing about this sport is coming out with a statement like that. How ludicrous is that?
well, that's where
you know
our
what I mean?
media. That's where the media has sunk down to the lowest common denominator again.
You'll never
And
believe
think about
what happens next.
Think about what is the sport in our culture that has the most parity? So we're complaining here, or the media is complaining about the UFC losing its unbeatable guy, and before that its unbeatable woman, and now everything's sort of meshed together. What's the sport that has the most parity of any main sport? The NFL. What's the most popular sport in our culture? The NFL, because every single year, this year your Broncos won it all. Now my Giants signed all these defensive guys. I'm excited for next year.
You didn't mention your Redskins.
The Redskins have no hope no matter what.
You're wrong.
But no matter how good or bad things are going, you always have a little bit of hope for the next time, and that's what makes it exciting. And I think MMA is a sport that carries that along. Who would have ever thought the last time we saw Miesha Tate in with Ronda Rousey that she was going to be the world champion? Who would have thought, even when she was losing to Kat Zingano, that she was going to? Who would have even thought it after 4 rounds the other night that she was going to be the next world champion? But
Love it.
There it is.
There's nothing like a good comeback story as far as Miesha Tate is concerned. Nothing like a good comeback story as far as Holly Holm is concerned. I want to see Holly Holm fight now. Like she posted a picture of her getting choked out. That's like her. It's become a thing now. Let me post to the world my thoughts on the fight. And the picture she chose wasn't her looking good with the belt. It was her getting choked out. That kind of says something about her psyche. Now I want to see her fight again. Same with Conor.
In 2011, she was knocked out in a boxing match by an opponent. She rematched that opponent 6 months later and beat her.
Yeah.
This is a person who you can count on to get back in that gym and say, never again.
And it's all how you spin it. Holly Holm's already been training. Diego Sanchez posted a picture of her training jiu-jitsu on Monday night. Like, she's already back.
Yep.
Holy crap, she's got the heart of a lion. Okay, now let's talk about this. What do you do with Miesha? Because if Ronda, and isn't it interesting that already these pictures are emerging of Ronda? I don't know if you saw them in the gym. Yeah. All of a sudden, she's hitting the heavy bag. So what does it say? I mean, she was on the sidelines indefinitely when Holly was the champ, but now just throwing that out there. But okay, if she is only coming back in November because of movie commitments and whatnot, what do you do with Miesha? Do you keep? That's 8 months away. Do you keep her, or do you do what Robert Follis said on Monday and you make her fight at 200? Because the thing is, if she loses to Amanda Nunes, who let's assume is the number 1 contender. Now there's no storyline between Amanda Nunes and Ronda. So it was acceptable when it was Miesha Tate and Holly Holm because it was a storyline with both. But now you bring in Amanda Nunes. Rousey Nunes doesn't feel the same as Rousey against those other two. So do you roll the dice again? Do you do what Holly Holm has been criticized of doing, or do you now keep her on the sideline? She's the hottest she's ever been. And wait for Ronda to come back. What do you do?
Well, let's see. What does she want to do? We'll find that out. I guess she wants to come back at 200 to follow us to stand on her behalf. But I like 200 in a rematch versus Holm, personally.
Okay.
And I think there's a little bit of buzz for that, and I think there'd be a lot of interest for that. I don't think it could headline 200 by any stretch of the imagination, but it could definitely contribute there in an important way.
Okay.
Again, no matter who wins, you've set up a nice return for Rousey. It could either be Holm or it could be Tate.
Yep. So you're just kind of buying time.
Yeah, well, the thing is, look, that fight was... Why would you have a rematch, right? Some people want to say, Aldo had 10 years tenure. What's that got to do with anything? He got stretched in 13 seconds.
Yeah.
Miesha Tate was on the brink of defeat and clawed her way out, and credit to her for her. But Holly Holm was winning that fight, even with a 10-8 second round, in my judgments, and I think many others as well. Let's see that happen again. I would bet the second one would be just as competitive, if not even a little bit more competitive. I really want to see. To me, that's the way to go, and it sets you up with Rousey down the road. Just last thing on this, there's this 2 strata of the women's bantamweights. There's your there's your Rousey, Holm, and Tate. Then there's your Zingano, Pena, and Nunes. They kind of need to figure out at that second tier who's going to bubble up again, and then once that happens, we can start to rotate them in.
What do you do?
Well, first I would want to say that I want to start by saying that I believe that it's important for everybody to stay in his or her lane. I believe that Miesha Tate and her team need to tell the UFC when we're prepared, the first day we're prepared to fight again. And if that's at UFC 200, fine. But they should have no say in who that opponent should be. That is, a champion should not be picking opponents.
Fair.
The UFC then, obviously, if we're going to assume that Ronda Rousey is not going to ramp up her training to get there, so then they have to say who's the most deserving. In my mind, it has to be deserving. And Kat Zingano owns a win over Miesha Tate. She's the one I would go with. I thought that Amanda Nunes' win was good, but I don't think the win that she posted the other night would jump her over Kat Zingano in my mind. I know Zingano has not been active and Nunes has been, so that would account for something. But the fight that I think is most deserving is if you're not going to go with either a rematch or because you don't want to do another rematch, and you're not going to go with Rousey because she's not ready. The next one I would do is Zingano.
It's funny because all of what we're saying is like the spirit of Ronda Rousey still playing over this whole scene, right? Like what makes sense while we're waiting for Ronda to come back. And so you still realize that Ronda is that star. She's 100%. That person sitting out there. My thing is, I mean, if she's available to go sooner, that would have to be the fight, right? It would be like the perfect segue one way or another. Is either Miesha Tate is able to, and to me that fight is not a gimme. Before when they were fighting each other, I thought, this is Ronda Rousey's going to blow her out again. When they were talking about a third one, it didn't really matter. But now I wonder about Rousey because of her psychological, what she's kind of gone through. How will she look when she gets in there? So if that's the fight, I see different intrigue on it. That's the fight that I think should happen. But as far as like Amanda Nunes and if she's going to do 200, I'd much rather see Holly Holm get in there too. Same reason as you said. It's kind of interesting to hear you said. I didn't think you'd go there because you've been talking about this rematch sort of exhaustion that's been going on.
Which I still have.
But you're right about this one because I think that this fight was just that epic. We always use that word, but it was. It played out in the exact way that warrants a rematch. When you watch Robbie Lawler against Roy McDonald, you would happily take that rematch, wouldn't you? Anytime that they wanted to do it because the fight, they just came together in such a great way. And I think that that's the exact same thing. And you still have, then you have the same, basically the same stakes in play, which is Ronda Rousey sitting out there. It does away with that second tier that you're talking about, but at least you get the top sort of sorted out for that next person to kind of come up.
I do like that idea a lot.
And if you do that rematch, the one thing that it does also is it does build up. It gives Miesha Tate an opportunity to really enhance her resume. If she gets 2 victories over Holly Holm, then the fight against Rousey is really appealing. Bigger. And if Holly Holm comes back and starches her, then she's got momentum going into that. And that kind of builds back up that big mega fight that you're looking for.
And I think it's important to capitalize on both of their momentum right now. I mean, the mainstream media has taken notice of Holly Holm and Miesha Tate. So if you do that again, you're hoping that they jump on board this time with smarter narratives, and that buys you time until Ronda is ready to return in November. Okay, now what do you do with Conor and Nate Diaz, who are also blazing hot?
This I think is a much more difficult call. Wow, so hard to know. People are saying Dos Anjos versus Diaz too. I couldn't possibly have less interest in that. Not competitive at all. If they want to make it because that's the fight Nate wants and RDA is okay with it, we'll make it because it has all the there's a lot of reasons to make it. None of them are that it's really interesting, but that's not a reason to not do a fight all the time, especially for a championship belt. So there's that. Some saying Lawler, there's that as well. What about GSP? Maybe there's that too. I feel like Nate should really explore his options and find which one will put him on the biggest map in the 2 weight classes, even if he's a bit outsized at welterweight or a bit, maybe doesn't want to cut to 55 or whatever. But whatever the case is, he really needs to think very strategically about that. For Conor McGregor, it's a real simple choice, right?
Wait, but you didn't give me an answer. You don't have an answer.
Look, if they can make GSP, make it.
You think so?
Yes, and if you can't...
And by the way, have we noticed the tweets here? Yes. This is not a coincidence. Every night Faraz Zahabi is tweeting something else. Hey, Nate Diaz.
Right.
Those guys don't do that. The same way they don't show up to fights in Vegas.
But you know what? I spoke to, it's interesting because, can St-Pierre wrestle Diaz to the ground? Probably, most likely. But I spoke to Diaz's boxing coach, and one of the points he made is Nate Diaz does not box like Nick Diaz. Nick likes to get on the inside a little bit. Nate is much more about using reach. And, look, St-Pierre with 2 ACL surgeries and off for God knows how long, maybe he won't be the same.
What's a bigger fight? Nate Diaz?
Let's just be clear before people put down this video. I would favor St-Pierre to win. But that being said, it's kind of intriguing.
Is that the biggest fight for him right now in a perfect world?
Maybe the Lawler fight? Maybe.
So you think Lawler is bigger than St-Pierre?
It's for the title. I'm not saying, no, it's not bigger than St-Pierre, but...
Chuck disagrees.
No, I don't think so.
I don't know.
The return of GSP versus
No,
Nate?
I'm not saying it's bigger. I'm saying it's maybe in similar conversation.
Nate Diaz is still in that spot right this second where it's his novelty fight. Any big money fight for him would make sense. And I just feel like some of these title ones, because they lack the merit, and the people who are holding those belts, RDA and Robbie Lawler, just aren't those intriguing matchups.
And there's a big queue at welterweight too.
And there's all that. So I just feel like he'd be better off. I mean, a GSP fight would make sense from both sides. They both liked it because you've got Nate Diaz, who just came off of this fight, he gets another pocket full of cash. He's able to do this stuff, and I feel like that's the kind of fight that will intrigue him at this point.
Can I tell you who's
Please.
Nate Diaz's next fight is going to be against the Nevada Athletic Commission.
Come on.
I mean, look.
Don't throw that out there.
Free Nate Diaz. I mean, look.
Now
The
you're
guy was
just
out. The guy was
depressing all of
out.
us.
The guy was out partying a few weeks before, just a couple weeks before he stepped in the ring in this.
But Nate's not the one who's had issues with this. It's always been Nick, right?
You don't have any time to get stuff out of your system, man. You know, look, and believe me, I'm a card carrying medical marijuana user myself. I have no.
Hell yeah, you are.
I have nothing against Nate, what he uses and what he doesn't use. But I'll tell you something. If you don't have any time to get that out, and Nevada is dogging about that
Let's
stuff.
say he's clean, though. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to throw one out that I haven't seen mentioned anywhere, and I'm actually kind of shocked that it hasn't been mentioned. This is the dark horse, and this is one that I feel like is still a viable option, given the history of the UFC today, and, up until this point, and given who Conor McGregor is. Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor 2. Do not sleep on that fight. The UFC has been prone to making instant rematches after the first fight was a success, either business-wise or entertainment-wise, and I get the sense that Conor McGregor is the kind of guy who will be like, gosh damn it, I can beat this guy. I was beating him in the first round. Give him me again.
Really?
155.
I don't feel that at all.
I don't know if this is, don't get me wrong, I don't know if this is the fight the public will love the most. I don't know if it's the smartest move, but I would not be surprised if this is on the table.
Diaz was doing shots of tequila on Instagram a week before he got called for that fight, and then goes and houses him in the second round.
Think
and
about
Conor had a
Conor's-
full camp.
Think about what Conor was saying. He was saying the next time I fight at 170, the next time I see Nate Diaz.
Man, they can't hold that belt up. Frankie Edgar.
Well, that's the interesting thing.
Well,
I'm just saying.
God bless Frankie Edgar, but he is going to go on a shooting spree, and not a jury in the land is going to convict him.
All I'm saying is, I feel like that's something that we're not, like, we're talking RDA with option, we're talking Frankie, Jose Aldo, all options. I feel like this is one that might fly under the radar.
I hate that fight.
You hate it?
Because it just sounds like, oh, our golden boy lost, so we got to make sure we give him a chance to. It's a little bit like wanting to run, Rousey back in against Holm, not because you think that not because you think it's the biggest fight, but because, our golden girl lost. I mean, I hate that kind of matchmaking.
Let me be clear. It should unequivocally be Frankie Edgar. There's no doubt about it. If we're going on fairness and merit and all that, it should be Frankie Edgar. I legitimately feel sorry for the guy at this point.
Not just fairness, but also it should be Frankie Edgar because of what happened in the Nate Diaz fight. Have you ever seen somebody go from stand up to getting choked out more easily? I mean, when McGregor went down.
Actually, I have.
When
to be honest,
McGregor
big
went
odds.
shot for that takedown,
Friggin' wagging hammer over
it was like a hot knife through butter. It was the easiest. I've never seen a transition that was so easy.
Oh, come on.
And
Really?
what does Frankie Edgar do but take you down and beat you up down there?
Although he was rocked, not to give him excuses.
So that's a legitimate excuse. He was rocked. I'm not saying that at full strength McGregor is going to be that easy to take down and take out, but it did. But there are guys who have been rocked, and when they're really good jiu-jitsu guys, they just operate out of instinct. And maybe they aren't successful, maybe they get choked out anyway, but just their instinct takes over. His instinct was all wrong.
Next, you're going to say he's a wimp for tapping, right?
No, that's.
Did you write that article on this today?
No, that was absolutely.
Of course,
that was
you of all people, Mr.
No, that was absolute
McGregor hype
nonsense.
train is not real.
No, that
Here
was
you
absolute
are.
nonsense. The idea that he
Dancing on his
shouldn't
grave.
have tapped is this. We don't even bring that up.
Okay.
That's ridiculous. Of course, if a guy's got you choked and you're nowhere to go, tap. Don't be an idiot. But it did call into question the same things that pre-gassing out Chad Mendez did, which was to bring him down and beat him up. This was another instance of that. So the two guys who've really had some ground game have been able to take him, not take him down because Diaz didn't take him down, but to take him out. One guy took him out and the other guy took him down and beat him up. So that there are a lot more questions about his ground game that arose over the weekend, and who's the guy that's going to expose that? I know Jose Aldo also is a black belt, but he's not going to fight
I just
in the
think we're a
ground.
little tired of
It's
that
got to
feud.
be. It's got to be Frankie Edgar. He's the guy, and if Nate Diaz, if Conor McGregor can go out and fend off Frankie Edgar and his takedowns and whatever he can do on the ground, then more power to him. Then he proves himself. That's his proving ground.
Fascinating time.
Yeah, I had a feeling like basically he was perhaps putting 145 in the rearview mirror. I didn't know if he'd ever. We talked about this before. I didn't know if he'd ever want to
Kind
make
of
that.
talked about it afterwards as well.
And I mean, who knew if he wanted to actually? Because I mean, we've seen him on the scale at 145. It's just it's something else. He transforms into something else. Like he looks like.
He looks like death.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows? But it sounds like that's what he would have to do now. I feel like that's his most logical thing is to go to 145. If they did, I mean, and obviously I'm going to agree with you guys. I think that Frankie Edgar is the most logical choice in that because just given what he did to Mendez and being promised, so similar to Miesha Tate before she finally got her shot, I just feel like that's the right move if he's going to go to 145. If he's not, though, I think that they really have to ask him, like, you got to free this up, especially coming out, like, if he's going to go float around and hold up divisions like that, I think you'd have to ask him to give up that.
Ask him. You just tell him. I mean, if you're not fighting at 145,
well,
the
I'm trying to be.
The
polite.
C stands for Conor. Don't forget. They ask, they don't tell. Okay, it's going to be fascinating. I think we could all agree on that. The road to UFC 200 to see how they build this card. I mean, now we're in that time frame. It has to be built now. And there are some names out there. Like I said, George showing up in Vegas, no coincidence. Anderson Silva, the return of Cain Velasquez. There are some names there, so it's going to be really interesting to see what the UFC does. Now, this is really poetic in a strange way. On Friday, before UFC 196, they held this press conference, the Unstoppable press conference. Now, us in attendance could not hear a thing. So while it was great, they somewhat dropped the ball on that front. I know it was unintentional, but it was just very hard to hear what was being said. But by all accounts, it was a big success, and it was very entertaining to watch online. I watched it after the fact, and it was great. And it's a sight to see all these big names up there on a stage. But how about this? In the span of 4 months, Ronda Rousey lost, Paige Van Zandt lost, Sage Northcutt lost, and now Conor McGregor. Like 4 names that the UFC has really been pushing, and rightfully so for different reasons. And now here we are. All these people lose, coinciding with the return of Jon Jones.
Isn't it a thing of beauty?
Isn't it amazing? And now you start to hear the narrative come out. He's sober for the first time. He's the pound for pound king. All these sort of things that we were reluctant to say post UFC 151. Jon Jones, the savior, in his first weekend out in front as a returning UFC member, is now the guy that the UFC has to push as the return of the king. And you wonder if they would have done that had these people not lost. But isn't it amazing how this whole thing played out? And then you have the crowd cheering for him like he's some kind of rock star, booing Daniel Cormier, the clean-cut American Olympian. It was unbelievable. It's just this thing could not have worked out better for Jon Jones, right? It's amazing how this all worked out. So I'm really curious to see how the next month and a half goes as far as the way they push him and what they say, because you can already see them getting behind him more than ever. And I wonder how Daniel feels about all of this. This to me is such an interesting time for Jon Jones in particular. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, ask Frankie Edgar. He'll tell you, nice guys finish last.
Yeah.
In this sport, not villains win. This is the sport where Darth Vader will beat Luke Skywalker every time. It's the truth, man. And the timing is some ways coincidental. You go back and you watch Daniel Cormier on that dais, and he's almost in disbelief, listening to him being booed, trying to undermine the very real life shortcomings of Jon Jones, and it's all falling flat. Because I suppose they simply don't view him as the authentic title holder in one capacity or another. But it is amazing that this guy, because it was roughly around the time of Mayweather-Pacquiao when he had that incident. Because I remember I was in Vegas and I was talking about it. And here we are today, less than a year later, and people are chomping at the bit to get him back. The fans are booing frankly, the rightful champ. I mean, he was stripped, and Cormier did defend it, right?
Yep.
And won it and defended it. This guy has had every number of second and third chances, has more recently the audio of him driving and being like, I didn't even know I was supposed to have my license.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad. And fans like, it's okay, Jon, because we miss your dominance, and we can't wait to see Act 2 of this. It is, boy, the wheels of justice grind slowly for Jon Jones, but they do grind, my friend. It is very interesting to see.
Yeah, but you mentioned the key word, the dominance. I mean, he is number one for a reason. He's the guy. And so people do love a redemption story, and it may not, it may pan out to be the best thing that could have happened to him, because maybe all the turmoil that he went through will bring him around to being a better man, and he'll grow up, and all that stuff beyond the fighting world may turn out to be a really good thing for him, or he may fail again. We don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that he's the best fighter we've ever seen. And that's enough to want people to bring him back and get him back.
so often we lament that there's no off season in this sport, right? Like so many times, if you look at other sports, there's an off season. What does that really do? It just replenishes your hope. You get all excited for the next season and whatever team you're following and everything. Jon Jones was sort of, he basically just went through an off season. So anything that we felt about him in his last appearance goes away. It's almost like, well, that was last time. That was the last version we saw of him. And I feel like that's sort of what happened here, especially at that press conference. I just felt like you could see it. He'd been away so long. We'd sort of, all of a sudden you're like, wow, imagine Jon Jones stepping in there again. And we're back in that space. And that's kind of fun because, to be completely honest, going back to what we were talking about earlier, I was saying that there's so much parity, you're not going to see those guys that are that dominant. He's really the one guy out there right now then who's still that dominant. Nobody has beaten him, you know what I mean? And the guy he's facing is his greatest antagonist to date, and it's a rematch. He's holding the strap. All that's going to be a fun fight.
I love the idea though that he's kind of viewed as this sort of savior now, like you were saying, like it almost all these losses and the parity in the sport makes his run that we may have taken for granted that much more impressive. In a strange way, and I'm curious to see like how Daniel, because deep down that annoyed him.
It must.
And I'm curious to see how he adjusts.
When he talks about
how he adjusts to that. If I were them, I would do 2 more press conferences and try to play up on this whole thing of like this Jerry thing that they were playing up. You do one in Louisiana, you do one where Cormier is the star, and then you do one in New York. And so you see the juxtaposition.
Man.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
You take them to their hometown, so you get the local media covering it there. They're coming to town.
That's a great idea.
Right? They got to do that.
But New York, I mean, you don't mean where we are.
Nah, go upstate New York.
He's not a.
Go to Rochester.
That's where Cormier was wrong.
But you know
from
what?
the beginning
You could fake that. You don't. Cormier's from Lafayette. Go to New Orleans. Go to New York City. You don't think the media would show up?
They show up, but he's not a hometown hero. Jon Jones is.
So make him one. Promote him as one. That's effective
He's
promoting.
New York's own. He's New York's own. I mean,
and the New Yorkers will definitely come out for Jon Jones now. They may have not before, but they definitely will now.
America. And I don't mean to speak for you Americans, but I feel like you guys love reclamation projects, good or bad. Canadians, we could see through certain things, but you guys just get excited about people on the comeback trail. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of which, let's talk about Wanderlei Silva before we say
So we're
goodbye.
going to talk about Trump when he said that.
Wanderlei Silva, now a member of Bellator MMA. It's official. Also a member of Ryzen, but I mean he's doing like tag team matches. I don't know what's going on over there. But the Bellator one is a lot more interesting to me because, of course, he's suspended for a year and 2 more months by Nevada. And in our sport, everyone listens to Nevada. So if you've been suspended by Nevada, we all adhere to it, the fighters, the promoters, and you can't fight anywhere else. Do we feel as though Scott Coker, as wacky and zany as he has been as Bellator president, will try to be the first American promoter in a long time who says, screw you, Nevada, I'm going to take him to some reservation or some state that's not going to listen to you and make him fight, or give him a fight before the suspension is up in May of 2017?
I don't think so.
You don't?
No, I don't.
I feel like he will.
Really?
You don't think?
You have a tip on that, or you're just saying
No,
that?
this is an educated guess.
Yeah.
Just given
I don't think so, because if you did that, you would want to do that from a position of strength, not weakness. You would want to be able to say, I'm going to put this guy on in Japan because I can, because if and when he comes back to the U.S., in fact, you wouldn't have to wait for that. The commissions are going to want to talk to you right away if you do that. You have to be able to say, if there is a punishment, it won't affect me. That is the opposite of the position Coker is in, where he needs every star he can get and couldn't possibly jeopardize either wasting Wanderlei for whatever he could return or the ability to promote in certain states. I don't. Look, after it's all said and done, he complained about the commission rules for the weight cutting in California and then announced 2 shows there or something. Like, he definitely is a guy, and remember, he defers to them in ways the UFC doesn't. UFC, there's commission testing, but we have USADA testing. Coker is always like, hey, we're regulated by the commission, we trust their judgment, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying he's a commission guy exactly, but he definitely, I don't think, would ever cross them like that.
Bellator runs shows on reservations.
Say that very
the UFC doesn't, for the most part.
It's like
everything adheres, just site deals, though.
Everything adheres to basically Nevada, but we're talking about like Thackerville, Oklahoma, and you're talking about Mohegan Sun, in Uncasville, Connecticut, where we're at. But those types of things, I don't know exactly how they sort of, go with Nevada's ruling on that sort of thing. So he's going to be 41 years old, or right around 41 when he comes back. How much can you get him to fight in that time anyway? Now, I know in Bellator we're seeing guys much older, but I'm saying like we don't know how much he has in the tank. So I could almost see it more like what you're saying, that I could see a scenario where they try to have him fight at least once or twice in Japan, because I just don't know if the repercussions matter to them as much where the places that they want to put him on.
Promoter's license doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, with the places that
he doesn't run shows in Nevada.
That's right.
So
he doesn't
what?
do
He
Nevada.
runs shows in California.
Right.
They haven't run one. They used to run shows in Jersey. I'm sure they will again. Maybe nothing happens, but I have a hard time
Truthfully,
believing.
I don't know how that would extend these days. Like how
And what benefit do they really get by hosting a show in Japan? They get the midnight feed that happens on New Year's Eve or something for
No,
them.
I don't think they get any benefit. Unless someone else is paying for his.
Well, then why would they do it if you don't think they get any benefit?
Well, that's why I'm saying I think they will do it. I think
Really? Wow.
I think Scott Coker is redefining this game, so to speak, at least on his terms and the way he thinks.
If he can get away with it, he should. But we live. Sorry, Jeff. We operate under a certain norm that these commissions will circle the wagons. If that norm is now broken, I mean, do what you want, I guess.
Sorry, just to add to what you were saying, sorry, I feel like Nevada sometimes is playing by their own rules, and I wouldn't be surprised if other commissions are being like, you guys are doing things a little differently here. Like maybe there's
That's
some
what I'm saying.
cracks.
We don't
That's
know.
where I was going to go with it, in the sense that Nevada has represented itself as a clown show. That commission is ridiculous. Has been that way over and over again. Now, ironically, in this instance, this is the one time where I kind of fall on Nevada's side. I feel like it was kind of a little bit of a technicality that Wanderlei was not already licensed for a fight, but he did run away from a drug test. And this is one where I was like, I sort of feel like Nevada was in the right, even though that's still up.
Come on,
that's kind of.
He deserved a lifetime ban.
Well, I'm not saying lifetime, but I'm saying that he was deserving of a ban at some point. Now I know that there was. You don't think that he deserved anything? Okay.
Zero.
Well, I
he
felt
was
like
on license. It says in their statute they have jurisdiction over license.
Okay, well, obviously there are people who agree with you, but I feel like Nevada was a lot. Let's just put it this way: they were a lot closer to being right than they've been.
Fair.
Than they've been in a lot of other instances where they really have.
I like how
just
I like how we grade them based on Marco Polo. Marco, you get closer.
It's horseshoes. It's a game of horseshoes.
Right.
But so it's kind of ironic that the one time when they're closer to being right is the one time when we might see some kind of we may see somebody bucking their system, and I think that the reason for it is because of the reputation that they built up across the industry. I would not be surprised if Bellator ran some shows, not necessarily in California where it's more direct, but in some places where they're going to have no problem getting themselves sanctioned and give a thumb in the nose to the Nevada Commission.
If they talk to commissions ahead of time and they get the indication that there won't be any repercussions for it, they'll do it. But I don't have any belief that they'll risk it. I don't.
Can we all agree that they're at least going to try and do their
They just had a guy who
diligence?
almost died on their last show, and
Sure.
now you're talking about them going out and being like, F you, Nevada.
They're at least
Not
going
only
to
did
try.
they have a guy almost die on their show, but then they decided to counter-program UFC 196 with that fight card.
Did they really?
That's what I heard.
They
I
didn't
didn't
make a
watch
big
it. Obviously,
stink
I
of
was
that.
watching.
Usually they do.
I was watching 196, but I believe that they promoted that fight card as what they were going to show the same night. So there are no rules and there's no sense of logic or decency. When it comes to promoting fights, so why not just go ahead and do it?
As crazy as
Jeff treats Bellator 149 like it's child pornography. Like you can't even look at it.
As crazy as that fight was, and how scary it was after the fact with everything that happened to Dada, is it fair to say that there was a trickle-down effect that we maybe didn't expect?
Yeah, maybe.
They had two shows right after that were kind of, obviously a lot weaker on paper, but showcased some stars like Darren Caldwell, obviously. Those cards did pretty well,
They did well.
by all standards. So, I don't know. I wonder if there was a method to the insane madness.
Look, I'll retract my argument a little bit in saying, to your point, I didn't think there'd be as much trickle down. So to that extent, I will say mea culpa. However, at Caldwell, even after the DVR plus 3 numbers was only at 1.1, 1.2, he would have been at 1.8, 1.9, or plus 2 had he been on Bellator 149. He could have doubled the audience on him. And by the way, he looked awesome against Joe Warren. Like, to me, you can say whatever you want about that show, they still botched it by not having Caldwell on there.
I agree. I'm still waiting for them to build a star in this new era because Caldwell is from the previous era.
Right.
A little bit. How fun would have an Aljamain Sterling versus Darren Caldwell
Come
fight
on,
been?
man. Dude, he ragdolled a former
Yeah.
Greco world champ. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got great hair too. Tremendous hair. All right,
And he's
that
from
does
Jersey.
it for us.
He's from Jersey. He's a Jersey guy.
That is true. Favorite moment in the history of the beat?
Oh, I can't even say it because
What? There is a moment.
Yeah, I'll tell you after the show.
No, you can't do that. What about other people watching?
Favorite moment? Jesus.
Well, will you tell us the moment?
No, I really can't. I truly cannot.
What happened? Do we know about this?
Oh, you know about it. Oh, you know about it.
What could it be?
Oh, I
It
know.
involves a spill, I'm sure.
No. Does it involve a $50 million number?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You stole mine.
Wow, is that yours?
Yeah.
That is a great moment. That is a great
Straka.
moment. That's just
My
for
man.
the insider fans out there. You got anything, Jeff?
I was going to say the spills. All
The
of the
spills.
water flying all over
Yes.
the place is probably my favorite.
I think we all agree, though, we have a ton of fun doing this show.
Yeah, it is
and
a
we
lot of fun.
appreciate all of you who tune in each and every week. And we also appreciate those who get really mad when we don't have a show, like last week, and you're waiting for us and you're saying it's not the same.
And we try every week.
We do try.
Our Ariel is on the ball about this. If we don't have a show, it is not for a lack of effort.
Yeah.
Trust us.
That is true. The plan going forward is to have a show, with or without me or anyone here. We want to have a show each and every week because those of us who can do the show like doing it,
Yeah.
right?
It's absolutely. I've got. You know how many train miles I have now?
That's
I
true.
could go around the world.
There we go.
If Amtrak did.
That's probably the best byproduct of this entire thing. Luke's train miles. And on that note, we say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching the 100th episode of the MMA Beat. Here's to 1,000 more. We hope that we'll all be doing it for many years to come, and we hope that you'll be watching as well. For now, like I said, we say goodbye. That is Luke. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.